Good evening, New Zealand. Welcome to Straight Talk. This is episode number 78. Tonight, we discuss, a lot of topics tonight. Hot topics. Are women being underpaid? We'll ask the female panellists tonight. Should we ban social media for under 16s as proposed by some of the government, not all the government? Did anyone find the media's wall-to-wall coverage of the appointment of the new Pope slightly weird, given their usual attitude to Christendom? And what are the media really up to? And the Ministry of Health has been caught out a number of times demonstrating political activism on important health issues. So can we still trust the Ministry of Health? Without further ado, let's introduce the panel, and a beautiful lot today. Peter Williams is back for 2 weeks in a row. Somehow he did a change around, and so he got punished by having to appear twice. So Peter, extra marks for you. Well done.
Absolute pleasure. Always good to be here, Bob.
I'm glad to see you finished your dessert. Brendan Malone, nice to have you, just slightly north of Peter. How are you, Brendan?
Yeah, I'm good. Thanks, Bob. Always good to be back, even on wintry nights.
And slightly north of that in Woke Wellington is Dr. Ate Moala, but not woke. How are you, Ate?
Malolele, I'm good, thank you.
And finally, right up north is Simon O'Connor. Hi, Simon.
Probably not far north enough for the woke and the weak in the world. There's a lot further from here. But anyway, that's a different commentary.
All right. Now, we have got breaking news tonight. I was going to use this as the image of the week, but we are going to talk about it shortly. And I chose it as the image of the week because it has been the image of the week. Nobody can deny that. But we will come back to that topic. But the real story has actually been today. And Peter, you'll be able to relate to this because you were on last week and we were talking about the misogynistic abuse. And we were looking at some of the media coverage. For example, the misogynistic abuse of Jacinda Ardern. Tory Whanau was copping abuse. Kanoa Lloyd reckons she was copping abuse. And Lana Cochrane-Searle, some radio host, said that there's online abuse as well. These were all coming out of stuff in the Dominion Post and the Press and Sunday Star Times, which is all part of the same stable. Next minute, on the Sunday Star Times at the weekend, there's an attack on female MPs by a female journalist. And as part of her, and I do apologise, slightly offensive what she wrote, but this is the problem. She said, it turns out you can have it all so long as you're prepared to be a C word to the woman. Let me just get rid of that now. But that is an article by Andrea Vance. Peter, I actually had to ring Simon just to check that. I gave that article the benefit of the doubt and actually thought, no, surely not. As unfortunately, Simon gave a reality check. That seems the lowest of the low. Can it get any lower in your view as an ex-journalist?
No, not at all. And I was just thinking, I've been in the broadcasting and media game since 1972. So what are we talking, 53 years? I've never, ever heard that word or seen that word alluded to in an on-air situation or in a newspaper or online publication before in the mainstream media. Sure, on Twitter, on Facebook sometimes, in the really low depths of social media and you might say alternative media, the Martin Bradburys of this world are more than happy to throw that sort of word around. But heaven forbid, this was published not just online, but actually on newsprint as well in the Sunday Star Times. Appalling, absolutely appalling. And you know what's even worse, Bob? Her editor backs it up by saying it is robust criticism of a politician. It is not robust, Bob. It's obscene.
Yeah.
And I hope that somebody takes them to the Media Council or some media regulator over it. I don't care if, the offending letters were blanked out. Everybody know what it means. It's just beyond the pale.
I was a little naive and didn't realise that it was, they'd gone that low in the gutter. But Simon, the irony is that these news media outlets are calling out people for being misogynistic and abusing female MPs and all this research. And then here's a woman journalist abusing to the max female MPs. That has you got to have a degree in hypocrisy to get that stupid, don't you?
You do, although at the moment, Bob, I'm still recovering for the fact that you had to come to me to seek advice around bad language. Look, it's hypocrisy with a capital H. I mean, look, a couple of quick points, because I'm sure Arte and Brendan will have thoughts as well. First and foremost, the left, the progressives, the woke, whatever you want to call them, often what they accuse others of, they are. And so all these articles, as you say, turn out misogyny and abuse of women and constantly running after the Tory Farnells and others and trying to turn it into, oh, you've been abused. It's actually more often than not the same people, like Andrea Vance, who are the abusers. And I use that word quite deliberately because that use of language is by its nature abusive. It's not called for. It's not needed. I think Tracy Watkins, as the editor, needs to be called out. She allowed it to go through. So this is two women allowing the abuse of other women while crying wolf around the treatment of women. The other thing I would just point out, and it's one of my little frustrations, I have no doubt that women probably get it more than men. But I think people need to understand the abuse comes to all politicians and anyone of standing. People like myself just did not go running to media with every death threat, every rape threat, and every bit of abusive violence. We just don't do it. It's just not in our nature. And I just think that needs to be said. And I also just want to add, there needs to be more evidence. I'm getting sick and tired. It doesn't matter if it's around misogyny or all sorts of things. Where are these threats? Give us some evidence. And that's one of the big problems in our modern mainstream media. They make all these accusations. You had it around the Benjamin Doyle Green Party stuff. Show us the evidence. And it's just not there. In fact, last point, the only evidence is the Andrea Vance's abusive and toxic wording towards the likes of female MPs in Parliament.
Yeah. Arte, any surprise? I mean, it just seems amazing that they're complaining about misogynistic abuse and yet it's a female doing the abusing in this particular instance.
I agree with Peter and Simon. Lucky for me, English is my second language. So when I was reading the stuff, I had no idea.
No.
I mean, I knew it was disgusting, but I didn't know what the word is. And then I asked my husband, and he said, "I don't know." So just so glad. I mean, I know it was disgusting, but didn't want to go further into it. It's just really reaching out to touch the bottom. So, but I'm not surprised. It's just so disgusting.
Brendan, it really seemed like Andrea Vance, the journalist, had just completely lost her rag and just no control.
This is the thing. You don't turn on the sisterhood, you see. And if you've been a follower of cultural affairs for as long as I think those of us in this online room tonight have been, you will know this is not unusual. I think about something like abortion, for example, where the sisterhood was more than happy to throw any post-abortive woman under the bus and even turn on them because they weren't supporting the pro-abortion cause. So I'm not surprised by this at all. I think two things that struck me, though. Number one was, remember all of the very, very vocal and vociferous criticism of anyone who dared to even engage in basic, mild-mannered criticism of Jacinda Ardern, and how they were accused of being a misogynist simply for raising opposition, even mild and polite opposition to her. And now here's some of these same people who are turning on other politicians who, again, females, but they're not the right type of female. And the other thing I'd say too is I was actually reminded of William Wilberforce. And people might be familiar with Wilberforce for his anti-slavery, many decades of his life dedicated to it. But he's also actually quite pivotal in a lot of things. He's actually credited by some scholars as being almost single-handedly responsible for ushering in the Victorian era in England. RSPCA was one of his things. But one of the things he was very big in was the public manners movement, a restoration of actual politeness and virtue-driven, character-driven speech when you're dialoguing with others. And he really tried to lead the way. Before his conversion to Christianity in the British Parliament, he was a cutting wit. And apparently he would just cut people down very brutally. He stopped all that after his conversion and worked hard. And he was very big on that idea of restoring manners to the public life. And it seems to me, going back to where Peter started from, that's not what we're seeing here, and it is just a complete denigration and degradation of the discourse in our public life, and it's not a good thing.
Yeah, I mean, I can guarantee that if this had been said targeted at Jacinda Ardern, the journalist would be gone by now. But there seems to be this double standard. All right, the video of the week, just very quickly, because we are obviously going to be talking about the media's obsession with the whole coverage of the Pope and what's their real agenda. But I don't know if you've heard of The View. It's a far-left ladies show in the US with Whoopi Goldberg and other interestingly weird people. Ana Navarro is a Nicaraguan-American political strategist, commentator, and she was really upset with that image of Trump. He shared the AI-generated meme of him looking like the Pope, which, from what I understand, most Catholics have a sense of humour and found it okay. But there's a Damon Amani who was born in Iran. He moved to Denmark. He's a comedian and he loves pointing out the hypocrisy of the liberal left. And he put together this little clip, but just have a watch because he actually calls out the hypocrisy and it's very cleverly done.
Him tweeting out an AI-created image and the White House official account of him posing as the Pope is disrespectful, it is frankly disgusting, and it is outrageous. And so all of those devout Catholics that voted for Donald Trump, I think you need to ask yourself some questions, and I think you need to ask the White House and Donald Trump some questions, because Trump, Mr. President, it's His Holiness, the Pope, not his oiliness, the dope.
And you're a sanctimonious joke. But look, the bigger picture is right here in my pocket, and I will pull it out. This is Rihanna dressed as a pope. Olympics 2024, mocking Jesus Christ's last meal. Over here, camera, over here. Don't run, because Trump only posted a meme. But these are actual photos. And I don't see that same energy of yours, Anna, when it comes to Hollywood actually mocking God. This is Madonna on a cross as Jesus Christ.
We'll be right back.
Okay, very cleverly edited, but it did call out the hypocrisy, and so we're seeing lots of hypocrisy in the media. Anyway, let's move on to our first topic because we've got 4 doozy topics tonight. Firstly, this are women getting paid less? So Minister Brooke Van Velden, the Workplace Relations Minister, Brooke Van Velden announced the government was urgently changing the Equal Pay Act to narrow the claims threshold, said the old system was too complicated. Unions and proponents say it was comprehensive. The bill was passed in less than 36 hours and has got rid of claims mostly relating to teachers and health workers. Now, the government says the change is about workability, that claims were complicated, costly, becoming conflated with general bargaining. And some of the settled claims compared librarians to custom officers, nurses to police officers, teacher aides to corrections officers, administrative staff to civil engineers. And so the question is, are, for example, library assistants equal to engineers? Should clerical staff at Health New Zealand get paid the same as mechanical engineers? Should social workers get paid the same as air traffic controllers? Now, that's not me asking that. That's the Dominion Post and the New Zealand Herald. So don't shoot the messenger. I'm just relaying what the trustworthy media are saying. So my questions for the panel is, firstly, do you support the move by the government? And I guess as part of that question, will women voters desert the centre-right parties because of this? So let's start with the adult human female in the room. Ate, are women getting paid less?
The women have always been paid less throughout the age. And, in health, for example, our nurses have always been paid and have never been paid properly. And of course, that's why we lose so many of our very experienced nurses they leave the nursing workforce and they go elsewhere. Either they go to Australia or they go and find another career. And, it's the same with midwives and of course our teachers. Terrible, when we think that they've got the most important job in helping our kids, and a majority of our teachers are women. So yes, the women have always not been paid properly. Definitely not support this move of government, but of course, the question is whether people is going to desert the right, the national. I mean, they're just playing politics, of course. They just push this through. National does it, ACT does it, Labor does it, whatever area that they're talking about. I think the important thing is that people will understand that this is just a manipulation of government, whether it's national or ACT or Labor. One encouraging thing for me, because they're so short of teachers now, and the government is calling for teachers to, who have retired to come back, and renew their registration. One of our friends from church, she is mid-70s. She starts tomorrow. She's had 43 years of teaching experience, and she's ready to go back and help in a DSAL 1 school, here in Wellington. These are the kind of heart that, women tend to go into these careers, whether it's health, whether it's education, to do it. And they're not doing it for money despite the poor pay.
Okay. Are you saying, though, that if you get on a plane, that the pilot, whether they're male or female, should be getting paid the same as the air hostess, whether they're male or female? You're not saying that, are you?
Definitely not. I mean, my husband is a spine surgeon.
Yeah.
I hope he doesn't get paid. I mean, the people who prepare the equipment, they should be well paid. But hopefully, that the skill that a spine surgeon or a pilot have trained for, they should be rewarded properly.
Yeah.
And so, otherwise, we're going to lose our people overseas, and we are losing our workforce to Australia. We train them and we lose them.
Okay, so Brendan, is the underpayment of women a historical thing, or is it still happening?
That's a great question. It's above my pay grade, especially as a married man. But I would say there's a whole lot going on here. First of all, there's the fact that the government just rammed this through under urgency. I don't think that's justified. It was a cynical move, and I have big concerns about that. If your case is sound, make your case. And they've only really hurt themselves ultimately, even if their case is sound here. Secondly, I'm still not clear on exactly what it is they've done. I even went this morning and asked Grok AI, tell me exactly what this means practically. I asked for all the implications, and it still was a bit vague around the edges, which is not particularly helpful. It does seem there were some issues here. And then, of course, you had the fact that there is the gender pay gap, which is often talked about. But what people don't tend to do is they don't tend to take into account the fact that usually females will withdraw from the workforce, and rightly so, to have children and raise babies. Very, very important, probably the most important work in society, actually. And so they, over their lifetime, they aren't paid as much. But it doesn't necessarily mean that a male and a female with the same experience level and the same longevity in a job are being disproportionately paid, which would be unjust. And that's how it's often presented. However, I think to your question, Bob, that you asked, and you were asking Ate about it, I actually do think this is an ideological sort of papering over a much bigger problem here. And it's an issue of how do we structure our economies? Are they really virtue-driven economies? As far as I'm concerned, in answer to the question, should a rest home carer be paid the same as an engineer? Absolutely they should, because I think probably they are doing the more important of the two jobs. But we don't have that view. We've got a very weird view of utility that doesn't really value the human person and caring as a priority. It tends to value other things instead. But this particular hot thing of dressing it up in male versus female, misogyny, all the rest of it, is actually just papering over and not really addressing the real deeper issue. And it's not really helping. It's only making the whole thing worse. So as far as I'm concerned, the whole thing is a mess before and after what's happened here.
Okay, and Simon, having been in politics for 12 years, you would say that the process has been the enemy, and so it's put them on the back foot, and they're battling uphill just trying to sell it.
Oh, very much so. For me, it's probably more of how they've done this than the what. So, look, first and foremost, on the positive side of the equation, everyone from the minister to Chris Hipkins now seems to understand what a woman is, which is remarkable, as a number of people have pointed out. Look, women are not paid any differently to men at the moment, and think that's been the same as from the 1960s or 70s. So, if you're doing the same job, doesn't matter, you're paid the same. But Ate and Brendan touch on another theme, which is, are people being paid enough? I would just say that's a separate question. Pay equity is messy, mainly because no one really understands how it operates. And a lot of it just does not take in the factors which most people would think is appropriate. Brendan points out a lot of women do leave for motherhood by choice. That changes the overall dynamic. We also know, Bob, that men by and large do far more dangerous jobs. And so you begin to have disparities there, which, most of us, I think, would argue is just normal. But the pay equity advocates just say, no, we have to keep moving towards this almost a singular type income approach. So what the government's doing is actually quite reasonable in its thinking. Just to put it really, really simply, the claims going through are going to cost the taxpayer billions and billions of dollars, not just now, but into the future. It's a huge liability. And I'm not going to go into all the details. I'm certainly not Grok. But it's basically raising the bar to make the claims hard. It's not shutting down pay equity. It's making it harder. But what the government did and how they did it is appalling. And I've written about that on my Substack, even got picked up by the Herald. There's a worry. At the end of the day, rushing it through, it's been done in secret, rushed through an urgency. That looks really bad. Brendan's 100% correct. If they were confident in what they were doing, then speak to it. And I think at the moment, let's see what the budget overall brings, but this has fired up the left. It's fired up the unions. You talk about Andrea Vance and others. There's a lot of people fired up about this. And I think to the general public, they don't get the nuance. All they know is that the government, it wasn't, not to be blunt, Bob, it wasn't 36 hours. It was in 12 hours. They rammed through a law to take money off the poorest, most vulnerable women in our society. This could be a make or break. We'll find out in 18 months.
Can I just clarify that? What do you mean by taking money off women?
For a lot of people, they will see that there were claims, and there were 33 claims before the courts to increase the income for women who are cleaners, nurses, care assistants. That's just been ended. And so the general narrative is that the poorer paid people in society just lost out on money and cash. David Seymour gleefully said that, he and the minister had saved the budget. When it comes to politics, explaining is losing. And it doesn't matter if it's the Prime Minister or Nicola Willis, they're all running around now trying to tell people. No one's going to listen. At the end of the day, the message is women have been screwed over by this government. And I think that's what's going to stick, even if you try to get into the details, which is more nuanced. So that's what I mean.
Well, just before I go to Peter, Simon, from your experience, is there going to be some beautiful lollipop bribe in the budget that's going to undo all this perceived damage?
There could be attempts. Let's be clear, the government has no money and it's spending like a drunken sailor already. And so where is this billion-dollar bribe going to come to specifically for women? I can't see it. I can't see it. I think there's just going to be a lot of resentment. Again, the simplest message that people have got is that the government rushed through in secrecy a major change which affected the most low income, particularly women in the country. Very hard to break past that narrative, and I don't see the budget fixing that.
Okay, Peter, what do you think?
Well, as an exercise in political communication, it was an absolute disaster. Absolute disaster. They could not have done it worse. They should not have pushed it through under urgency. They should have gone to a select committee to at least discuss the issue. However, courtesy of the ACT Party's free press, which I received this afternoon, the short version is this: nobody, absolutely nobody, is having a pay cut. The Equal Pay Act from 1972 is still in place. 3, that Equal Pay Act still contains a pay equity regime. 4, the regime is more liberal than in most countries. And 5, the government will still be spending billions more on social services in years to come. The problem is that it was started by the national government themselves. They allowed the Christine Bartlett case, and I think it was 2016, wasn't it? The Terra Nova case. She was a care worker. She went to court, and the court decided that care workers were a bit like prison guards. Therefore, they should be paid the same as prison guards, which is an absurd comparison because, frankly, I would far sooner be a care worker than a prison guard. A care worker, you're unlikely to be assaulted by a mongrel mob member. But that government, and I think Simon was probably part of it, they then had two options. One was to adopt into law what the court said, or make their own law and say, no, we will not be comparing professions or occupations. Sadly, the government took the option of writing into law what the court led them into. That is, you can compare one occupation with another. In 2020, the Labor Party came along and took those comparisons to ridiculous degrees. Therefore, the government, because mostly it involves social services, which are ultimately government funded, therefore it was going to cost the government billions and billions of dollars. So the ACT Party, the Workplace Relations Minister through Brooke Van Velden, has come along and tried to bring some sanity to the situation and just go back to the scenario as it occurred back in 2016 or 2017 when that initial pay equity legislation came into place. But when you think about it, the concept of pay equity is farcical, absolutely farcical. How can you ever compare one occupation to another? What you have to do is find the market price for one particular job. And if care workers are badly paid, I have one solution to stop that. Shut the immigration gates. Make sure that we don't have incoming people from the Philippines or from India or Sri Lanka staff our rest homes. And then you might say, well, who's going to do the work? Well, last time I looked, there's about 200,000 unemployed people out there. They will not be getting any welfare payment unless they go to work. There would be lots of jobs suddenly appear for them. So the market has been allowed to go to low levels of pay in places like rest homes and care homes because of the immigration policy. So there's been a lot of government policy which has brought about the scenario which has led to the pay equity discussion. Look, it's very complicated, it is very nuanced, but at its heart, the concept of pay equity, in my mind, is just nonsensical. You cannot compare aircraft engineers to any other occupation. You cannot compare rest home workers to prison guards. And that was the start of it, and it's just got stupid, more and more stupid in the 10 years since.
All right, let's check. I have been just monitoring what the females have been saying, the adult human females that have been coming through the comments. So let's have a quick look at these. Just to be safe, just to protect myself on this topic. Nancy Margaret says, comparing apples with oranges, get real. Yes, I do support the government. What a rip-off. Jenny says, I was thinking if I was trying to get better pay that I would identify as a man. Heidi says, well, the fact that women are putting in less hours because of family commitments than men. Roaming Monkey, I'm not sure, but says, as a registered nurse from the UK, so I've made this grand assumption that may be female, but could be male, I get paid more here. Cost of living is higher here. Standard of living here is lower. It always has been part of the price you pay for being in New Zealand. Lisa, Tim just says that reporter needs to have to answer to the BSA. It's actually the Media Council, and we have made an official complaint. Apparently a lot of people have. That was just about Andrea Vance. Lisa says, industries that primarily employ women tend to pay less than those primarily employing men. People controlling stop-go signs or lights at roadworks get paid more than many care workers. And then
most of them are women.
That's right. And Heidi responded, Dean, your comment made me chuckle. The other day I walked past some roadworks people. There were 6 of them. 2 were working, 3 were looking on, and 1, it's run out, but it would have been supervising or making the cup of tea. And anyway, Yolanda says, well summed up, Peter. Okay, let's keep moving on. Second topic is the social media ban for under 16s. And the government has decided to take it on board and make it some official government business. I would suspect that maybe they've got some support from Labor, and so they think they've got the votes to get it across the line, even though ACT isn't supporting it. Simon, I will ask you about that. But just before we go around the panel and just find out whether you support a ban on social media for under 16s, I just want to play 2 short clips. The first, Australia is going to ban it at the end of the year, and so they're already putting in place how they're going to try and do it. It's not easy to do, but the Premier of South Australia, Peter Malinoska, who is a Labor Party Premier, he was on Q&A and he just made a couple of quick comments that I just wanted to play to you.
There is through whistleblowers and other reports, we've got to remember that some of these social media companies are industrializing addiction with the explicit objective of making a profit. Now, that's a rational thing from their perspective, but it's completely irrational from society's perspective, where we see evidence of social media becoming so intrinsic in young people's lives that it results in social withdrawal rather than healthy engagement. And social media services shouldn't be exempt from having any regulation or any obligations put on them. And this is the point. What we've now got is this huge technology that is for profit, industrialising addiction, and they're operating in a completely unregulated environment in this, what constitutes probably one of the biggest social experiments we've ever seen in human history that we now know is having consequences.
Okay, so that was the justification coming from Australia. And then last year at our Forum on the Family, Jonathan Haidt, the author of The Anxious Generation, we had an exclusive interview with him, and we're going to republish that actually tomorrow so people can watch that in full. But just very quickly, he just made a couple of quick comments that I just wanted to summarize before I come around the panel.
So the key to solving this is to recognize the key to the origin of the problem, which is a collective action problem. Why are all the kids on Instagram and TikTok, even when they themselves say, if you talk to college students, they say it's really bad for me, it's bad for us, I wish it didn't exist. They literally say that, and surveys show that. So why are they all on it? Because they're trapped, because it's a collective action problem. And so if you take your kids out of it, it's not clear you're helping them, because now they're isolated, they're alone, and they're going to hate you. And what that means is that if we take them all out together, we win. And so we have to do this together. And it can be as local as you, if you're listening to this, our discussion here, if you have, say, 9-year-old kids and you're in touch with the friends, the parents of their friends, just coordinate with them. Because if you do these things together, we can solve this. So social media is completely inappropriate for minors. It's an adult-only thing. It's full of sex and violence. It's full of solicitation. It's full of marketing. It's full of real dangers for kids, all kinds of scams, manipulation. So, adults, we let them make their own decisions, and if they want to do things that are bad for them, that's their choice. I don't want to let companies just reach my children and do things that are bad for my children without my knowledge or permission. This is insane. So no social media before 16, and for that, it would be really helpful to have laws. We can actually get this done mostly just with norms, not laws. But on this point, getting legislation, which is happening in Florida, in Utah, it's happening in the UK, is working on this too. If we can get legislation to say you can't even open an account until you're 16. The law currently says 13 and it's not enforced. Why not raise it to 16 and enforce it?
Okay, so Brendan, let's come to you first. I mean, I think you've got the most youngest children of all the panelists, so it's obviously a hot issue in your house. It's something that is front and centre for you. Is this purely just a parental responsibility, or is there some support and signalling from the law that's important as well, like the drinking age?
I think this is great, actually. It's already been the law in our house anyway, but no smartphones till you're 16. But the reality is that, for example, I'm going to be speaking to a group of parents at a school in Auckland next Wednesday night about this very issue. It's something that I'm regularly engaged on. The harms of social media, those clips really do summarize it quite well. It is very serious. It is extremely addictive, and it's a particular type of addictive technology that is also being gamed by the corporations. I think, ironically, this is one of the moments when I'm actually seeing a national government, doing something that is genuinely conservative. They are taking the power of the government, leveraging it to try and help parents be better and more empowered parents by protecting their homes from massive corporations that run social media companies who just have unfettered access to the kids right now. So I think it's a really positive move. It is enforceable. It's a matter of age verification, and there are various ways you can do that. It is absolutely, I think, an enforceable thing. And I think that the reality is that this technology and the harms that it causes, they're pretty serious. The implications of this are very, very serious. And we know that the younger a child gets caught up in that particular cycle, the more those issues really do manifest themselves in ways that are not healthy and that are not good. And it seems that the only way forward is to really, I think, treat this with the gravity it deserves. A lot of people are speaking at the moment as if the majority or even all parents are somehow capable of having the awareness, the time, the understanding, and the wherewithal to discern and then take action to protect their own kids. This technology just circumnavigates all of those normal parental barriers in a way that you actually do need a stronger level of enforcement to actually protect kids.
Okay, Peter, I got the same email that you got from the ACT Party, not because I'm an ACT Party member, but I just monitor their communications. And I mean, they were basically trying to argue that we should just have an inquiry, that there is a problem, but the fact that this bill is now being more research from the government so that they can beef it up shows that it wasn't right in the first place. But surely that's the purpose of a select committee review anyway. So is ACT right to say, hold the horses, there is a problem, but we need to think a bit more? Or should we have considered the bill that was put forward?
No, the bill that was put forward was flawed in many respects. The most remarkable part of it, the silliest part of it, was that it was up to the minister to decide which social media should be banned. It wasn't just an outright ban, a blanket ban on all social media. It was literally up to the minister, which means his or her advisors, to work out which social media platforms would be banned to those under the age of 16. The other major issue I have with that Catherine Wedd bill as written at the moment is that age verification would apply to everybody who wanted to go on a social media platform. So here I am at the age of 71. If, heaven forbid, I wanted to open a TikTok account, I would have to provide proof of my age. Now, you may laugh.
And your sanity.
Yeah. As long as you don't dance, Peter.
But the difficulty is that if I'm giving TikTok details of my date of birth and my passport number and my driver's license number, this is nothing more than a major data harvest. And that's the other big real fallback with that bill as written by or presented by Catherine Wedd. So therefore, that bill's a dead duck. It was in the biscuit tin, unlikely to be drawn out, and probably will never see the light of day. So therefore, what is happening in terms of some full inquiry into what can possibly be done is the far better outcome. Let's see what happens in Australia. But I've done a bit of research myself. I've got a couple of grandsons at 14 and 12. I rang them up tonight because I knew we'd be talking about this topic on this show. The 14-year-old, very mature, very grown-up boy, says he's only on, Instagram and Snapchat. Doesn't do TikTok. I think he's got a Facebook account, which he never uses. But here's the intriguing thing. He is in about, 5 or 6 sporting activities.
Yeah.
And it's the Snapchat or the Instagram chat groups, basically, which is the way they communicate in their sports teams about practice times, pick-up times for matches, draws, comments, all that sort of thing. So therefore, social media is very, very important to him. And I said to him, Victor, so if there was this ban, how would you feel about it? He said, I'd cope, he said, but it'd be pretty inconvenient. The next one down, the 12-year-old, he's just turned 12, by the way, in April. And apparently I didn't know this until a few minutes ago when Brendan said so. You can't get an Instagram account until you're 13. Well, my grandson obviously knew far too much, lied about his age, put his wrong birth date in, and got himself an Instagram account at the age of 11, was on it for a while, then decided he didn't want to be on it because it wasn't much fun. So took himself off it, but only for 3 months because he found himself not one of the cool kids and not knowing what to talk about anymore. So therefore he's back on it again, still, by the sounds of things, illegally, but he got himself an account by not telling the truth about the date he was born. So if it was that easy to verify his age or have his age verified then, I imagine it's not going to be very difficult in the future either. So I see real difficulties of impracticality with enforcing something like this. But then having said it, as my oldest grandson Victor says, social media is very important for terms of sports team and social group communication. So it's not a bad thing.
Yeah, I actually had a look at the law in Florida because that has actually been passed, although it is being challenged because it's supposedly breaching human rights or whatever they call it over there. But they have defined social media sites that they think are problematic are ones that promote infinite scrolling. And of course, we know that the social media companies are targeting through the scrolling. display reaction metrics such as like, and I think Instagram recently took away seeing the numbers of likes because they realized that was a problem, autoplay videos and live streaming and push notifications. But it would exempt websites and apps whose main function is email, messaging or texting between groups and senders and recipients, which is what you were talking about, Peter. Simon, you felt that it was better to do it at an earlier level, didn't you?
Yeah, look, I'm torn on this one, and so far as I'm very much with Jonathan Haidt and others, this is a major problem. And you and I, Bob, have talked a lot about this, and for parents listening in, the issue is not simply these children under 16 accessing pornographic or violent material. It's just simply been on. There's harm. So I can see that. I'm not blind to it. But I am also concerned about workability, and I'm echoing a bit of what I think Peter was saying. To verify that someone is 12, 8, 13, 16, you have to verify everybody's age. And there's a part of me which is nervous about that, of the government taking even more information, particularly if it's application by application. So one of the things I'm looking at, and only very early days, is actually it's the access to getting to the apps. So most of us will use either Apple or Android. You download the apps for your phone. That's probably the pinch point. And I think Florida's been exploring that. That's the pinch point where you verify who you are. So whether you are able to download these apps or not. Probably even a step further back, Bob, that you just get access to the store so that the government and others don't get to know what you are or are not downloading. Because some of what was just being shared then, and what you just shared, I think, ironically, coming out of Florida, a lot of conservative news channels, for example, and liberal ones as well, would be caught by that. Do you really want the government beginning to decide what you can and cannot watch because the Daily Wire or whatever else is putting out material in autoplay? So you've got to put a very deeply cynical hat on around a lot of this when you begin to hand control over to the government for what appears to be good reasons. But I will return to where I start. The evidence is very clear that social media is doing harm to our young people. Give them a phone if you want, but just make it one of those old Nokia flip phones. Don't give them the entire internet. But, the exact how you do it is a problem. And that's probably my very quick final point, because you have someone far more respected and articulate than Arte to come. And also, she's the only woman on the panel. Is ultimately what the government's announcing so far is just intentions. And that'll be okay if it gets into some substance. And I'm not throwing stones at the government. I think it's good they're looking at this. But there's no plan here. There's no structure, nothing. It's just intentions, nice little PR and news items. We need to see a lot more detail.
Well, Arte, you're in the health sector. I mean, have you seen some of the negativity? Can you understand the concern that people have about the effect of social media on kids?
Yeah, very obvious, as Jonathan Haidt had, clearly explained not only the addictive nature, but the mental health issue and just the performance of the kids at school. I mean, they're not doing well at school, and and then they stay up late into the night, so they're not getting much rest. So it's very obvious. Many years ago, you hardly see kids on antidepressants, whereas now so many of them are on antidepressants, which is what Jonathan Haidt had explained and what the research had found. Yeah. So, I mean, it will be great, as Simon said, all of us, we agree that it will be great to have this ban, but how do you work that out? At the end of the day, you need to do the collective approach and work with parents. I remember when 2011, before they connected the high-speed internet to Tonga, coming through from Fiji, the kids didn't have a phone. But when they connected, we tried to ask the government to block the pornography that is coming through, that will come through, just the nature of our culture and the islands. But when they connected it, they were giving out free phones to the kids, and they're all outside, Digicel in Tonga, just connecting. I mean, and these kids, I mean, the pornography and what is happening to the children, not only in the Pacific, and I'm sure it's the same thing that's happening here in New Zealand. So the mental health issue, the lack of performance because they're not sleeping. But the other thing that I think about the hypocrisy of the government. Great idea. I think it's just a poster note for national, but at the same time, as we just finished the relationship in sexuality education, the stuff that they're pushing, the framework, it's pornography. It's absolutely disgusting what they're teaching the kids. So how do they talk in one hand to protect the kids, vulnerable kids, whereas in the schools, the stuff that they're doing is perverse, it's inappropriate, sex, they're alienating the parents. So we have one, they're saying here they'll do this, and at the same time, they're pushing porn in the classroom.
Yeah. Just before we move on, Brendan, the issue that I have, or the concern I have, is that often the statement is digital IDs, we don't want to go anywhere near that. That's more government intervention. And yet I understand that, but part of me is also saying, hey, we've got a major problem with our younger generation and more kids coming into this. We've got an industry, which is the social media industry, which is uncontrolled and unregulated. Maybe we sometimes have to make sacrifices. Every time I board a plane, I make a sacrifice of having to get my computer out of my laptop bag because of the fact that there were exceptions, but that's the interference. You sometimes have to put up with those inconveniences for the greater good. So do we have to put up with a certain inconvenience for the sake of kids, Brendan?
Yeah, I do. I think we do. For me, I'm a conservative. I'm not a liberal. I'm not a libertarian.
Right.
And so as a conservative, I understand that you actually have to act for the common good, and you don't just think about your own personal autonomy, but how that plays out in the communal setting as well. I think too, as far as inconvenience goes, this is not a major inconvenience. Most people have already purchased something online where they've produced a credit card. B, we are talking here about major corporations that are unfettered in the lives of our kids. And secondly, I think this is really, really important to understand. If you're on social media already, I'm telling you right now, you probably, as far as worrying about age verification, the amount of data that is being harvested about you and sold on to other corporations, it's unbelievable. Like, an age verification is a blip in the ocean. We saw this, for example, during COVID, when Google quite willingly handed over to governments data about where people were and whether they were leaving home or staying home when they were locked down and things like that. The amount of data that is already being collected and harvested about you is off the charts by these corporations. So.
Yeah. So, Peter, there is a bit of a trade-off, isn't there? Because there's concerns about our own digital ID, but there's also concerns about an industry that is targeting and exploiting kids and causing harm, not to your grandchildren, because obviously they've got some maturity, but there are some kids. In fact, on both One News and 3 News, which I forced myself to watch tonight, they had the same paediatrician from the lobby group Before 16. And, what he had to say, he was just so concerned about the level of mental illness, the decline, the suicide ideation of young kids that he hadn't seen before. So there is a trade-off, isn't there, Peter?
Yes, there must be a trade-off. I'd really like to see some data. The fact that both networks have gone to the same pediatrician is always suspicious. Obviously, that person's name was on the bottom of a press release with a contact number, so therefore that's the person you go and see. Once again, lazy journalism, not going to try and find anybody else who might have another story to tell, but that's another issue, the state of the New Zealand media today. Yes, I can see all those issues there. I of all the points that have been raised tonight, though, I think what Simon has said regarding the phone and the device companies is the one that comes to mind the best, in that there is something put inside an iPhone or an Android phone or a laptop or an iPad or a tablet which says you've got to register your date of birth when you purchase the device, and you can't access anything age specific because of the age that's on that device. Now, okay, you can say, well, you can get around that by using mum and dad's laptop or big brother's iPhone. Well, then it becomes a matter of parental and family responsibility to make sure that the under 16 doesn't get to that device. So if you do have a device under the age of 16, your date of birth has got to be registered with the maker of it, and there's something inside that phone that says you're not allowed to download certain apps because you're not old enough. Seems a pretty simple thing to do.
Well, Simon, I think that a lot of people said there's no way we can ban phones in schools, and yet the law was passed, we did it, and it seems to have been a huge success. So maybe we just got to work a bit harder on this one. It's a tougher one, though.
Look, it is tougher. I mean, there's a physicality with taking a phone off a child. What we're talking about, what Jonathan Haidt and others are talking about, is actually what they're accessing on it. So it is more difficult, but the need is very pressing. And, Brendan's right. If you're on the conservative side of things, it's about, what we as a community can do to obviously protect, the people who are slightly more vulnerable or problematic. In this case, children, which makes it even more inherent an issue. But it's the how we do it. And, you and I, Bob, are already reading, talking to people overseas, trying to get a bit of a handle on this. I will just end with this little mischievous point, though. It comes out of what you just mentioned about 1 and 3 News using the same pediatrician. I have no idea who it is, so it's not aimed at them. But I'd be fascinated to ask a lot of these people lobbying what they think around gender ideology and pumping toxins into children and medicalizing them. Is there a consistency in their approach to protecting children? Because I suspect for some who have begun putting their hands up into this space, they're not consistent. They're jumping on the bandwagon of under 16, but more than happy to transition children and so forth. So, I mean, I suppose I'm conflating a couple of issues here, but I think we just got to be very careful around people's motivations. I'm obviously not talking around ours or family first, but I'm deeply suspicious of some who have entered into this discussion because they're at the forefront of medicalizing children, and yet all of a sudden now we're worried about them having a cell phone. Anyway, I'll stop there. And also I can see Brendan's got his hand up.
But can I speak to that point, Bob? Is that ironically, the gender issue amongst young people is a social contagion. And you know what the primary vector has been? It's been social media. And if that wasn't there, that would not have been that same social contagion. There's no way those conversations and that influence would have been able to be so easily exerted. So ironically, I think there might be a bit of a benefit here in that regard.
Yeah, and I mean, I read some of the ACT stuff, the way they're arguing against this bill, and I apply it to the way they approach the conversion therapy ban. They're sort of saying, oh, this needs to be more considered, and, we need to go slower, and it's too wide, and good ideas, but bad execution. And yet they voted to criminalise parents who affirm their sons as boys and their daughters as girls, and stop free will of counselling for things that you want to deal with in your life. So I found that hard to take. Artie, did you have anything to add before we move on?
No.
All good. Okay. We're going to get time for one more topic, and it's a doozy one. Just very quickly, though, we have announced our speakers for our conference. And, of course, we're very excited about this one. It's on August 28th and 29th. Very excited about these two.
Hey, guys. I'm Israel Folau.
And I'm Maria Folau.
And we're looking forward to sharing our story with you at the upcoming forum on the family in August.
It'll be the first time that we share our side of the story with you in New Zealand. We're excited to tell you about our experience, how much it has strengthened our faith, our marriage, and we hope that you feel very encouraged by it. We may be there, we may not be there, but if we're not, we'll do an interview with Bob, and we hope you enjoy it.
Yep, so that's very exciting. And there is our full lineup. Dr. Miriam Grossman, who you might have seen on the Daily Wire, What is a Woman documentary. Dawn Hawkins from Nkosi, which deals with sex trafficking, prostitution, and some of the stuff we've just been talking about, actually. Kirralie Smith, who's in court because she's calling out dudes playing in women's sports. Jeff Johnson from Focus on the Family, talking about the LGBT agenda and how to push back with truth and grace. And Amanda Ackman from Canada, who's going to be talking about the slippery slope of euthanasia. So August 28th and 29th, and registrations are now open. And yeah, the registrations were piling in just today. We're also going to record a live version of Straight Talk as well. All right, let's move on to our, it's going to be our final topic, sorry, team. So we won't get onto the same one we missed out last week, but that's okay. And I just want to talk about the media have been fascinated with the Pope. And let me just show you a little summary of New Zealand media coverage when the new Pope got appointed. And we will hear from some theological experts from One News and 3. I say that with my tongue firmly in my cheek.
No, my welcome to 3 News. May peace be with all of you. Those were the first words spoken by Pope Leo XIV from the Vatican balcony early this morning New Zealand time, setting the tone for his papacy.
New Zealand Catholics One News spoke to today were hopeful of where Pope Leo will lead, admiring his emphasis on caring for the poor. But others are raising questions about his past record on some challenging issues.
A pope for the whole world, not just the places where power lies.
Pope Leo is expected to continue in the same vein as his predecessor, especially when it comes to the poor. But he's also seen as a more moderate choice that could appease conservative America's fears that Pope Francis had suppressed tradition.
But Trump has not found an easy ally in Pope Leo. His posts as cardinal have been highly critical of the president's policies.
America's reputation on the world stage right now, as we've been talking almost every day at this point, is really up in the air and quite tumultuous. So it's very interesting that an American has been elected to one of the highest, if not the highest, spiritual office in the world.
And perhaps surprisingly, given their past differences, there was also a message of support from the US Vice President J.D. Vance.
I think it's important to remember that one aspect that may have appealed to the cardinals was that he was very committed to care for the poor and needy.
Especially one who has also expressed previously views that don't really align with what the current US leadership has been talking about. I mean, Pope Leo XIV has previously spoken about his desire to work closer to those in poverty, work closer to those who are poor.
New Zealand Cardinal John Dew voted as part of the conclave, and he has spoken today about the importance of Pope Leo being able to challenge things happening around the world, decisions that are making the poor poorer and the rich richer.
Even today in his speech in the Vatican City, he said that he wanted to be a pope that built bridges, something that seems, or an attitude rather, that seems to be in rather short supply around the world, and particularly in America right now.
In many ways, he does look set to follow the Franciscan path, with similar views on migrants, the poor and the environment, and increasing the role of women. But at a time when the church is facing questions over whether to forge forward with greater reform or revert to a more conservative path, Leo was dubbed the compromise candidate of the conclave, a middle-of-the-road option.
Already he's got Trump on his side, and I think in a general sense there is a concern that the English-speaking world of Catholicism is in big trouble.
And he has been more conservative in his comments on the LGBTQ+ community than Francis ever was.
And Pope Leo XIII was on the side of the workers, on the side of labour unions, on the side of the oppressed.
And despite being a close confidant of the former pontiff, he is notably not Pope Francis II.
Wow, yeah, fantastic. I mean, it's like the Pope's going to start a political party. Anyway, the Herald editorial said he's going to heal the America divide. There's no conflict anywhere else in the world, just in America, apparently. Apparently the Pope's no fan of Trump or his vice president. He's going to get rid of the MAGA-style Christian ideology. They haven't defined what that is, of course. And, yeah, commitment to social justice. So, Brendan, I saw you chuckling there throughout that whole thing. I mean, is the Pope starting a political party? Why is the media so fascinated with this?
Well, it's quite funny, and please don't shoot the messenger, my separated Protestant brethren, but the last week has shown that Catholicism is the main character of Christianity. I'm sorry about that. And also the Western world, everyone is looking once again to Christianity, ironically, and what's going on at the top of the church. Yeah, you're right. The Pope is not a politician, and I already, in that, there's different clips there were mistakes that were made. Pope Leo XIII, in his Rerum Novarum encyclical, The whole encyclical was, yes, it was about workers and labour's rights, but it actually starts by calling socialism a perversion and defending the right to private property. So clearly a lot of these people haven't read it at all. I think it's quite interesting because what we're seeing here is desperately a media that is, as per usual, up to their nefarious business. They have an ideology they're trying to push, and what they will do is they will take anything that they can glom onto from the papacy, from the Pope, and they will use it for their own ends. They will ignore the stuff that they don't like. I noticed they didn't reference his comments on the question of sexuality and gay marriage. He's pretty staunchly in opposition there, and gender ideology as well.
Yeah.
Abortion was another one. They didn't mention the comments. So they'll ignore that stuff, and then they will try and, I think, misrepresent a lot. We've seen that consistently. And the idea that somehow Pope Francis was the first pope who cared for the poor, you clearly don't know your church history if that's what you believe. I'm sorry.
Okay, Peter, why is the media, I mean, generally they don't want to know anything about Christendom, and if they do, they want to, put it down. But they really have been on a love fest. I mean, that coverage was just over a 12-hour period.
Well, it started, of course, with the passing of El Papa, of Pope Francis, because I think the media, being left-wing as they are across the Western world, they saw in the Argentinian Pope, Pope Francis, they saw somebody who was a left-winger like them, who maybe dropped hints about ideologies that they could agree with, like gay marriage, like being respectful to those who have transitioned from one gender to another. So the passing, the coverage of the death of Pope Francis, I thought was way, way different. And I just compared it to Pope Benedict, to Joseph Ratzinger, who was, whenever that was, I guess, 8 years ago, wasn't it? He was an arch-conservative. When he passed, I just don't remember the live crosses to St. Peter's Square, the Europe correspondent leaving his or her post in London and going to Rome. I just don't remember there being such over-the-top coverage of that Pope's passing and of the election of the new Pope then. So what has happened since? Maybe the media believe that we've got a Catholic Church now which is way more liberal than what it used to be, and that it's going to become perhaps, I don't know, more and more like the Muslim, like the Islamic faith, which is, of course, the faith. I'm being silly here, but that's the faith that the media, of course, are in love with all the time, day after day, aren't they? They really don't like Christianity and think, well, maybe if Christianity could become a bit more like Islam, then it might be much better in the world.
Yeah. And the media always...
It's really stupid, but that's just sort of the cynical view that I have of coverage of something which was just so much more extensive than the last changing of the Pope.
Yeah, and Simon, they always tend to go off to the same commentary person, which is Professor Peter Lynham from the liberal side of the church. So you're only getting one side of the coverage, the so-called historian. My concern is that they're almost, from what I can tell, they're almost lobbying the church. The media are trying to get their viewpoint in and push it. I mean, is that the way you saw it?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it's exactly what they're trying to do. They're trying to shape, control the narrative, probably ever hopeful that they can create change. But they fundamentally understand what's happening. I mean, a couple of very quick points at the start. I think a wonderful witness actually by Pope Francis at the very end. I think, Brendan, actually, you wrote about this. So whether I'm plagiarizing or not, but
plagiarize ahead.
I think it's just a wonderful testimony to the end of life and suffering and death. I think it was no coincidence that Francis was seen without his cassock on, being wheeled through St. Peter's and so forth. I think also a wonderful moment of evangelization, motives or otherwise. The attention of the world was obsessed with what was happening in Rome and how many seagulls were hanging about the chimney. And I think they're probably the most popular. But look, I wrote a Substack. I didn't actually send it out by email. It's just a video, and it's on my social media. And it's not meant to be a cheap advert. It's only 4 minutes. But Why I mention it, Bob, is I think people, and certainly in the media, fundamentally misunderstand what's happening with the papacy. It's not a political office. So everything from Trump to Vance to Biden to Ukraine, it's completely irrelevant. The Pope has two roles. The first is to bring people to Jesus Christ. And he talks about building bridges. The hint's in his name. Pope comes from pontifex, which means to build bridges. And he's not building bridges to make everyone feel nice about themselves. He's building a bridge so that people can come to know the person of Jesus Christ. The second is the Pope is the guardian of the patrimony or the tradition of the church. So everyone here who's worried about LGBTI rights changing, women's ordination and all of that, I'm sorry to disappoint you. It's not going to happen. Period. We can spend the next hour discussing why, and we won't. But his role is not to change it. His role is to protect it. And then the third point, and a number of our politicians here in New Zealand otherwise falsify or get this confused. The church is not a social service agency. Okay, our church is here to bring people to know Christ. And if by helping people, and Pope Francis was big on this, Bob, he was trying to invite people in through his pastoral caring work. He's trying to tone things down. Why? To draw people to know Christ. That's why we do the good work. That's why we run the hospitals and the charities and the soup kitchens, not to be a social service. And governments, including this one, have to understand that. But fundamentally, the Pope is about bringing people to Jesus Christ and protecting the patrimony of the church. The media will never get this. Politicians will never get this. But hopefully those of us here and those listening will. Habemus papum. Had to get some Latin in.
Viva el Papa.
Arte, what's your take on it? I mean, the media did have a love fest with both the death of the Pope and the appointment of the new Pope, didn't they? I mean, they were all over both of them.
Yeah, it's just beautifully put by Simon and Brendan, totally there. And I believe that people have seen through the stupidity of the media. They've never been interested. They'll do anything to have a slant at Christianity or the church. And then all of a sudden they're twisting this just for their own agendas. Yeah.
Okay, so Brendan, you would say that they are trying to influence, but that's really the only love they have for it. It's whether they sort of go down the narrative that they're pushing.
Well, narrative is everything. And we should all know that now after a couple of years of sort of coming through the COVID madness. It was all about narrative. And a lot of people suddenly woke up and realized how much narrative was essential. And it's the same sort of forces at play now. There's definitely an attempt to probably almost try and cajole and put pressure on, absolutely. But yeah, Simon's absolutely right. This is not a political role. It's a role of spiritual fatherhood. It's a very different kind of thing. And already there are some signs that, he appeared wearing the traditional papal gear, which was a bit different from previous Pope Francis. There's other things as well. I think it's going to be a very different papacy. And already he's actually publicly stated why he chose the name Pope Leo XIV, who, by the way, Pope Leo XIII took on the culture head on. He wasn't afraid to call it out. And he said that he is concerned about AI technology, the AI revolution, the loss of human personhood and human dignity in that. And he actually wants to speak to that. He's a very smart man, degree in mathematics, and also he's a canon lawyer. So, yeah, I actually expect some really sharp thought to be coming from Rome soon.
Okay, and I did find it hilarious that they sort of almost forgave him for being American. Is that normal, Peter? Is anybody from America normally held in such distrust, or is it just at the moment?
I'm just waiting for somebody to utter in the public square, Pope Bob. I'm just waiting for somebody to say that.
I would never make the qualification. Sorry, I've been cancelled.
Come home to Rome, Bob.
No, that's his nickname.
Home to Rome.
That's his nickname. It's Leo's nick. He was Bob.
He was Bob.
Oh, is that right?
Prevost.
Yeah, he's Bob Prevost.
Okay. Well,
he rang his brother Bob the other day, and his Bob didn't answer the FaceTime. And then he rang back and he said, the first thing as Pope was, why didn't you answer the phone?
Well, it's funny. I live in an area where the main street is Charles Prevost, so maybe it's his brother. So maybe I've got some inroad.
No, his brother's name is John. Yeah.
Okay. Oh, okay.
Mum and Dad weren't too original. There was Robert and John with the two sons.
Well, that's what my parents called us. So careful what you say there, Peter. The other brother was Peter. Anyway, we better get out of here before we get in trouble. We're well over time. Great discussion, everybody. Great job. Thank you for being on. And sorry we didn't get to all the comments. Gosh, we've got a lot watching at the moment. But anyway, we will be back next Monday night for Straight Talk. Until then, you have a great week.